Welcome to the Age of Fission radio show with your host, Lonnie Clark, where we constantly remind you that love is greater than fear and happiness is resistance. Good evening. This is Lonnie Clark, your host with the Age of Fission radio show. I want to thank you for joining us, and I want to thank you for your persistence with me in listening to Helen Caldicott's book. This portion of our show is dedicated to completing reading this book once a week, and I apologize, I've had 2 weeks off, so there's a big lag. We are picking up where we left off on page 109. I'm reading Dr. Helen Caldicott's book, The New Nuclear Danger, George W. Bush's Military-Industrial Complex. And I'm just going to get right to it, but I actually pulled up some acronyms so that I can tell you what they mean, because we get into these acronyms and I'm telling you, even my brain gets confused, which is why they create these acronyms. Part of the reason why I do these readings is because I think people in America don't read enough, and they're willing to listen to audio and audio readings, but they just don't pick up the books. Like anybody listening to this podcast could have easily gone out and purchased this book at a used bookstore for $3, $4, $5 and have already read it between the time I've been reading it. This is the 10th reading. We're on page 109, and this book will go to, and this is without the appendix and all the stuff that she adds in the back. It goes to like page 202, I think. Or actually, it's really only 198. So we're halfway through. So we're probably going to have 20 readings. And they are only an hour long, which I think is a long time to be reading a book. For most people, that's a lot. And especially for me, because I do my podcast twice a week. One of the days is when my new co-host Heidi and I, we're going to be interviewing people and we discuss current events. On this evening, I have been reading this book, but I feel very challenged because there is so much going on in the nuclear liar world. And that's partly why I'm reading this book, because the world is filled with nuclear liars. Like right now in Southern California, there are huge flaring fires in Southern California. The Santa Susana fire. I think they're calling it the Woolsey fire. I did a bit on my YouTube channel about this last night because I am spitting nails over it. They're telling us that no radioactive contamination was dispersed through the fires, but that is almost an impossibility. That was the site of the very first nuclear meltdown. It wasn't just a test lab. It was the first nuclear meltdown. And they say partial meltdown. Well, no, it melted down, folks. And they let the radiation spew out for 2 weeks. And they didn't tell anybody about it for 20 years. And they just moved people into Chatsworth and Simi Valley and no problemo, just like they did in St. Louis. So the nuclear liars have got a lot of comeuppance. This is why they keep it a top secret, because they would be in jail for the things they're doing. So listen to this little factoid that I found out about the fire in Santa Susana. They say the Woolsey fire out in Southern California, you know, the fire that caused Malibu to burn to the ground? Well, it's right next to Malibu, as it turns out. So when the Santa Susana nuclear power plant had a meltdown, it was the only sodium reactor, and sodium explodes when it comes in contact with water. So when I saw that, and then you saw how when the firemen were fighting the fires, I don't know if any of you saw that on television, but they'd be spraying the water onto the forest out there, and huge flames would spew up. Now you're telling me that there's no radioactive and nuclear contamination. That is such a fallacy. The second thing that got me really spitting nails was the fact that there are families now in Simi Valley and Chatsworth that are suing the government for allowing them to move into a radioactive nuclear dump site. And guess what happened in those fires? All of their evidence went up in smoke. So now, guess what? They can't sue the government because their case just basically literally went up in flames. I'm sure they're not going to give up because their families are still sick. But this is the kind of thing, like when I'm reading this book, I'm like, oh, I want to biting nails, because I know for many people, especially people in Eugene in Oregon, and in Springfield, where I'm on KEPW LP 97.3 FM, on 11 o'clock on Tuesday nights, you may not listen to us at 7:30 in the morning on Saturday. That's when my other show is. Or you may not follow me on YouTube or follow me on Spreaker, where you can go to Spreaker, Spreaker, Spreaker. Who came up with that name? I have no idea. But that's the name of the website that hosts all these podcasts, called Spreaker. And that's where my show is hosted, The Age of Fission, and I actually copy Nuclear Hot Seat there. And soon, hopefully when I get out from the weeds of work, I'll be able to put up Dave Parrish's weekly podcast, The Fuku Fighters. Fuku Friday is what he calls it. And I know I've talked about it several times. Anyways, I'm going to get to this reading. I see I'm 6 minutes in to the show. I want to thank everybody for joining us. Please go to my YouTube channel at nutzfoart, NUTZFORART, and subscribe and like. You can listen to my videos. You can get kind of a flavor of really more of who I am, because I do talk about this, and sometimes I lose my temper and cuss a little bit. I make an effort not to swear, although I'm not very good at it sometimes when I start talking about these things. But it's really important for us to share this information because nobody's talking about it. And it frankly is an outrage. I consider it to be murderous. They literally are disregarding. Over 67% or 60% of the children in Simi Valley have cancer. So things are awry. When they say nuclear is clean, green, and lean, that is just lies, lies, and more lies. But let's get to the nuclear liars and their plan for nuclear war. So we stopped on page 108, and we stopped on 1018, so I really apologize for that being so long ago. We stopped at the new subtitle called, Does NMD... Now, let me tell you what that is, because I went to the internets to get what these acronyms mean, because, I mean, it's just so outrageous. They keep calling... There's a huge WikiLeaks page that says all of the U.S. military abbreviations. And man, they are long. That's another one. I'm going to do another video on that on my YouTube channel. NMD means, and you can go look it up yourself, but nuclear missile defense is what NMD means. But they have all kinds of acronyms, and to be honest, they're kind of frightening how cruel they can be. Almost all of the plans for the NMD, and most involving TMD, Theater Missile Defense, will violate the ABM, Anti-Ballistic Missile Treaty, the cornerstone of all other nuclear arms control treaties. The ABM Treaty, for example, directs that America and the former Soviet Union, now specifically Russia, can operate only regional interceptor defense systems each. The current systems are in North Dakota and Moscow, respectively, making the new Alaska-based system a clear violation. The treaty would also be violated by upgrading the present U.S. radar systems, by implementing a defense system covering all 50 states instead of the agreed-upon 48, by installing a new satellite network, or by shifting the interceptor system to a new location, all of which are currently approved as part of George W. Bush's National Missile Defense Plan. The ABM Treaty states that because no country can protect itself against a nuclear attack, each side must therefore live in fear of mutually assured destruction. That, in fact, and I'm going to digress here from the reading, is exactly what my teacher at the University of Oregon told us, that most political scientists believe that nuclear weapons keep us safe because we all live in mutual fear. Nobody would be stupid enough to launch a military weapon. I about fell off my chair and raised my hand immediately and said, what about the crazy factor going on? Like right now we have Kim Jong-un and we have Traitor Trump at the helm. And she's like, well, we do have that. It's That's why I'm not going to school there anymore, because I can't take it. I'm not going to spend my money on people that are feeding kids propaganda that doesn't help them think outside the box, that is killing us. Let's see, where did we leave off? Okay. The ABM Treaty states that because no country can protect itself against a nuclear attack, each side must therefore live in fear of mutually assured destruction. Logically, under these circumstances, no country would be foolish enough to launch a nuclear weapon. Thus, the ABM Treaty has always been intended as a brake on unrestrained nuclear arms buildup and has proven effective since its signing in 1972. Its violation by either party would be an unconscionable and extraordinarily destabilizing act in the world bristling with nuclear weapons. Yet the U.S. openly plans to violate the ABM Treaty. In justifying his plans, George W. Bush told an audience in Iowa in 1999, "When I was coming up, it was a dangerous world, and you knew exactly who they were. It was us versus them, and it was clear who them was. Today, we're not so sure who they are, but we know they're there." Yeah, we got enemies because we're making them. Violation of the ABM would in turn jeopardize other international treaties. Currently, for example, the Russian Duma has ratified a new nuclear arms treaty, START II, calling for the bilateral reduction of the strategic arm nuclear weapons to 3,500. Hold on just one second. Need to cough. Should the ABM be violated, Russia has indicated that it may well cancel plans to reduce its nuclear arsenal and refuse to consider additional reductions under START III. Surprisingly, START II actually allows the U.S. to maintain 3,500 deployed strategic weapons, as well as 950 operational tactical nuclear weapons, 25 hedge strategic weapons, and 2,500 in the inactive reserve. And I meant to say 2,500 hedge strategic weapons and 2,500 in the inactive reserve. So that's kind of incredible, isn't it? That's a huge number. Maintain 3,500 deployed strategic weapons, plus almost another 1,000, plus and almost another 5,000 between the hedge and inactive reserve. How many nuclear weapons do we need to kill the planet, to destroy the billions of human beings, every life on it? I mean, is that their ultimate goal? These people are insane. Furthermore, the START II treaty does not actively call for the elimination of the hydrogen bombs, only for the destruction of the launch platforms, so that in the future the bombs could be hauled out of storage and redeployed. START III, however, if agreed upon, would reduce Russia's and America's strategic arsenals to fewer than 2,500 nuclear bombs each, and would, for the first time, include requirements for the actual destruction of nuclear bombs, with the plutonium and uranium disposed of in such a way that they will never be able to be used for future construction of nuclear weapons. It is relatively easy to monitor these procedures technically, given the goodwill that currently exists between the countries concerned, but this may not continue to be the case under the Bush administration. Furthermore, President Putin, wishing to discourage America's NMD developments and wanting to move rapidly toward nuclear disarmament, recently offered unilaterally to reduce Russia's nuclear arsenal to between 1,500 and 1,000 weapons, or even less, at least 1,000 to 1,500 fewer than the number demanded by START III. This offer comes with a proviso that America not proceed with national missile defense, abide by the ABM Treaty, and that the Senate ratify the Comprehensive Test Ban Treaty. So, that all went by the wayside, I'm sure. I should Google it. I will Google it in a minute. We're almost at the end of this subtitle. However, at the Crawford Ranch meeting in Texas between President George Bush and President Vladimir Putin during the second week of November 2001, shortly after 9/11, Bush proposed a unilateral reduction of U.S. strategic weapons to between 2,200 and 1,700 to take place over a period of 10 years from the current level of more than 6,000 weapons. This would obviate the START II treaty. The START II treaty ban on Russian land-based missiles with multiple nuclear warheads and would leave most of the U.S. deterrent on submarines invulnerable to surprise attacks. Putin left the meeting without a response, although he is expected to reciprocate in kind. The Bush move is intended to soften up the Russians for the U.S. intended violation of the ABM treaty. But the U.S.'s attachment to NMD is so bizarre that the State Department actively encouraged Russia to maintain, quote, large, diversified, viable arsenals of strategic offensive weapons capable of delivering an annihilating counterattack, unquote, as long as Russia allows the U.S. to violate the ABM treaty and to proceed with national missile defense. I apologize for laughing, but insanity is kind of funny. Okay, back to the book. China, with its 20 intercontinental nuclear weapons, has already confirmed that it might well speed up deployment of a new generation of weapon systems if America goes ahead with NMD, National Missile Defense. Indeed, China will be encouraged to do so. In a speech in early November 2000, Foreign Minister spokesman Zhu Bangjua said, "The United States is a country with the largest and most sophisticated arsenals of both nuclear and conventional weapons in the world, and it is engaging itself to develop national missile defense and theater missile defense. Such an act is contrary to the trend of the times because it is not conducive to the international efforts of disarmament and arms control. It will also exert a lasting negative impact on world peace. The Chinese side expresses serious concern, and in particular if the U.S. is to develop theater missile defense and to include Taiwan. This is something that will be by no means accepted by the Chinese side." Unquote. Ironically, the small nuclear missile defense system for rogue states that Clinton advocated would actually be an adequate defense against China's 20 nuclear-armed intercontinental missiles that could reach the U.S., as opposed to the multi-layered missile defense planned by George W. Bush. Likewise, European allies are increasingly worried that violation of the ABM will initiate a new nuclear arms race and separate European security from the U.S. French President Jacques Chirac said in the New York Times on December 17, 1999, quote, "If you look at world history, ever since man began waging war, you will see there's a permanent race between sword and shield. The sword always wins. The more improvements there are made to the shield, the more improvements are made to the sword." Unquote. New subtitle, What the World Thinks of NMD. You know what I want to do right now? And I am going to do this. I really want to take a look and see. Let me see how much time we've been talking here. Hold on just a second. Do a little bit of clickety, but I'm going to look. I wonder how many nuclear weapons the U.S. now currently has, because this book was written in 2001 or 2002. How many nuclear weapons does the United States have right now? So now this will tell us actually where they came along. The United States is one of 5 recognized nuclear power. It has an estimated 4,018 nuclear weapons in either deployment or storage right now, as of 2017. 4,000. Wow, you should see the map where they're at. I was going to cuss again. Sorry, you guys. Woo, at least I stopped myself. Thank you, KEPW, for helping me not cuss. Okay, let's get back to the book. I think we have a little while longer here to be reading. My radio show on KEPW lasts for an hour, so that's how long I'm going to do this reading for. And I am going to kind of break in and out here and make commentaries because I think this is shocking. They have moved along. This whole idea of let's get along with everybody is kind of an old idea. And the idea that any president says, like, she's talking about Clinton had a different idea and then George Bush brought in a different idea. I think what they're doing is the military has essentially taken over our government. So that each time we get in a new president, the president gets presented, this is what you're going to sell to the public. And that is what they sell to the public. And if the public doesn't buy it, too bad. They just do it anyways. And that's what we're seeing with Trader Trump. He's like, well, people don't care. At a certain point, I'm hoping with our new Congress, we are going to have some accountability and we can pull in the reins on this. But I've gotten cynical. Okay, back to the book. We're on page 111. Gee, we read 2 pages. What the world thinks of NMD. Star Wars is designed to protect not only the United States, but obviously, should other countries be persuaded to host Star Wars facilities, they are not necessarily protected, but become targets of a nuclear attack. Citizens of certain countries due to participate in Star Wars are not happy about the prospect. England, for example, has been deeply involved in the U.S. early warning systems for many years, hosting 2 American bases at Menwith Hill and at Fylingdale, Fylingdale, Fylingdale. At the level of British participation is increasing. Over the past year, almost 500 British military scientific representatives visited the U.S. under the auspices of a 1958 Mutual Defense Agreement, a 2-fold increase of visits from 1995. And the U.S. military establishment visited the British scientific military facility at AWE Aldermaston 110 times during the same period. 2 Aldermaston staff were seconded to Los Alamos and 1 to Lawrence Livermore to assist with, quote, the technical development of facilities of mutual interest, unquote. Washington plans to upgrade the U.S. base at Menwith Hill in North Yorkshire, giving it a crucial role in Americans' plans for a space-based infrared missile launch detection system. Tony Blair has already granted approval for Flying Del Moore to be upgraded, but the Parliament has not concurred. The U.S. also plans to construct a 15-story-sized radar building at some unknown location in the U.K. But the strong opposition is mounting in England as U.S. plans expand. Aware that Bush is in favor of a full Star Wars system, the committee of 12 members of Parliament concluded after deliberation, quote, the government should articulate the very strong concerns that have been expressed about NMD within the UK. We are not convinced that the U.S. plan to deploy nuclear missile defense represents an appropriate response to the proliferation problems faced by the international community. We recommend that the government encourages the U.S. to seek other ways of reducing the threats it perceives, unquote. And I venture to say that all that went by the wayside after 9/11, right? I mean, they have basically heavily invested. And you notice this other thing, they don't mention Star Wars anymore. They don't call it Star Wars, they call it Space Force. Space Force, that sounds better. Space Force, not Star Wars. Because Star Wars reminds us of what? Murder, death, kill because of Obi-Wan Kenobi. Even Obi-Wan Kenobi died. So how good can Space Wars be if they kill Obi-Wan Kenobi, right? So let's call it Space Force because, you know, that movie Spaceballs, everybody sort of, if you've ever seen that old movie Spaceballs, For those younger of you out there listening, you may not have even watched this old movie. It's 10, 15 years old. It's a goofball movie, actually. Very funny. I'm grasping at straws here, can you tell? But I'm trying to figure out this, like, lemming drive off the cliff to planetary suicide. I just can't comprehend it. I don't know about you, but up until Fukushima happened, I literally thought our government was responsibly managing the nuclear catastrophes and responsibly managing our nuclear arsenals. And I find this book shocking. Back to the book. Okay. Sorry about that, guys. I sort of diverted. And Hugo Young, writing in The Guardian, says nuclear missile defense is born of an arrogance that Russia could not be expected to watch in silence, nor China, with its relatively small missile armory, to countenance without increasing its own nuclear force, adding that for Europe the project is an all-downside risk because Iran and Iraq are closer to Europe than to North America. Similar opposition exists in Denmark about the upgrading of the early warning radars in Thule, Greenland, a Danish province. Strategically significant early warning radars that require upgrading to X-brand status include the facilities in Thule, Greenland, Grand Forks, North Dakota, and Clear, Alaska. According to Ted Postal, these upgrades are exactly what the U.S. will need for a national missile defense program aimed specifically at Russia and China. Thus, incredibly, the U.S. seems to have allowed the perceived threat by North Korea, Iran, and Iraq to justify a system actually aimed at China and Russia. The most obvious clue about these intentions is the current deployment of the world's most sophisticated advanced tracking and imaging intelligence gathering radar on the northern tip of Norway, 40 miles from the Russian border. This new X-band radar, along with the one to be deployed in Ericsson Air Station in Shamaya Island, 1,500 miles southwest of Anchorage, will be used to collect data on Russia's long-range missile tests, rendering Norway a prime Russian target. Called Vardo, codename Havestare, Havestare, Havestare. See what I mean? These guys are creepy. Oh. Called Vardo, codename Havestare, the U.S.-owned Norwegian-based radar could well present a formal violation of the ABM Treaty. With a potential resolution of about 15 to 20 centimeters, it will provide extremely detailed images of Russian warheads and their missiles. To date, the most sophisticated radars have resolution of at best 5 to 10 meters. Wow. The two radars in Norway and Shamaya will be capable of monitoring the entire trajectory of Russian missile tests, including their powered flight, the bus maneuvering, deployment, and separation of warheads and decoys. Precise data will be collected on every phase of the missile and its bombs from launch to splashdown. The radars will be linked directly to the nerve center of the proposed nuclear missile defense, buried deep inside Cheyenne Mountain in Colorado. This data will be entered into the National Missile Defense Base, nuclear missile defense, increasing enormously the discrimination capabilities of the National Missile Defense System against Russian intercontinental ballistic missiles. Okay, so I'm driving myself crazy saying that wrong consistently, so I'm going to go back to these abbreviations. NMD. I'm telling you, I'm not a sciencey kind of person, so you start throwing these acronyms at me, and it does exactly what it is designed to do. National missile defense, not nuclear missile defense. Sorry about that, Miss Caldicott, or Dr. Caldicott, and to my audience. Back to the book. Okay. As Ted Postal says, if the purpose of the National Missile Defense System is to protect the United States from North Korean missiles, why is the world's most advanced tracking and imaging radar about to go online at the northern tip of Norway instead of northern Japan? According to Postal, Russia and China will be constantly concerned that the U.S. will eventually expand and modify their missile defense with nuclear-armed interceptors instead of the pitiful, hard-to-kill interceptors now planned for the system. Postal points out that the U.S. should at least be honest about its intentions. Both Russia and China are under no illusions that the U.S. agenda, he argues, but America is lying to the rest of the world, including its own population, using North Korea as camouflage to disguise its true intentions. Wow. And that game is still being played, isn't it? What rats we have running this government. As noted, Shemaya Island is to receive the next X-band radar. Part of the Aleutian Islands chain, Shemaya is a remote, windswept place. The closest inhabited point is an Eskimo village 100 miles away. Shemaya is therefore not the most convenient place for this facility. Because of its isolation, it is also an easy target for destruction, either from a missile or a small artillery piece mounted on a fishing trawler. The U.S. claims that this particular site has been chosen because it is in line with the missile attack from North Korea. But there is a political reason that Shemaya was chosen for this site. Senator Ted Stevens, the powerful ex-head of the Senate Appropriations Committee, is from Alaska. And because Clinton needed his support, an attempt had to be made to protect Alaska from Russian attack, even though this radar was precluded under the ABM Treaty. The Rumsfeld report stated that, quote, a number of countries with regional ambitions do not welcome the U.S. role as a stabilizing power in their regions and have not accepted it passively. Because of their ambitions, they want to place restraints on the U.S. ability to project power or influence into their regions, unquote. Good for them. But perhaps the U.S. should begin by questioning its right to project its power into other regions from around the world. 6.5 billion people inhabit the planet, not just 280 million Americans. Given the reality of the past and present U.S. interference in the politics of numerous foreign and sovereign states, the U.S. missile shield signals to the world that America maintains a significantly hostile intent. A working nuclear shield above the United States would be the equivalent of giving a sniper a bulletproof bodysuit. Would he be more or less likely to shoot others if he himself were immune? Well, we know that answer. And we know exactly what they're doing. So we're on Chapter 7. I'm going to keep going. Space, the next American empire. Here we go. Space Force. It is politically sensitive, but it's going to happen. Some people don't want to hear this. And if it weren't in vogue, but absolutely, we're going to fight in space. We're going to fight from space and we're going to fight into space. That's why the U.S. has developed programs in directed energy and hit-to-kill mechanisms. We will engage terrestrial targets someday. Space, airplanes, land targets from space. We will engage targets from space, in space. And that was from General Joseph Ashey, former Commander-in-Chief of the U.S. Space Command. Listen to this. 1996. This is how long they've been planning this, folks. 1996. The threat, ladies and gentlemen, I believe is real. It's a threat to our economic well-being. This is why we must work together to find common ground between commercial imperatives and the President's tasking me for space control and protection. That was from General Richard B. Meyer, former Commander-in-Chief of the U.S. Space Command, 1999, now the new Chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff for President George W. Bush. Here's another quote. With regard to space dominance, we have it, we like it, and we're going to keep it. That's from Keith Hall, the Air Force Assistant Secretary for Space and Director of the National Reconnaissance Office. Commissioned by Congress, John Collins' 1989 book, Military Space Forces, The Next 50 Years, was one of the earliest studies to explore in depth the notion of fighting a war in space and from space. Collins, a senior specialist and national defense at the Library of Congress, was funded by the Air Force Association and the Association of the U.S. Army, which meant that his book had a particular point of view. Endorsed by a prominent member of Congress, endorsed by prominent members of Congress, including John Glenn and John Kasich, the book described the possibilities and problems associated with space warfare. Other endorsees include Senator Sam Nunn, chairman of the Senate Armed Services Committee, who said, quote, "Space, a distinctive military medium, deserves a new school of thought. This book will be an indispensable starting point." Unquote. And former Representative Les Aspin, later Secretary of Defense for Bill Clinton, who said, quote, "No other military space study puts all the puzzle pieces together." Unquote. Collins began the book by paraphrasing Halford J. Mackinder's Heartland statement. Who rules circumstantial space commands planet Earth. Who rules the moon commands I read that quote wrong, so let me go back. Who rules circumterrestrial space commands planet Earth. Who rules the moon commands circumterrestrial space. Who rules L4 and L5 commands moon Earth system. So L4 and L5, those are areas in space where the respective gravitational forces of the moon and the Earth are in balance. And that's what that means. So think about that. Think about what they're saying. They're planning on ruling the circumterrestrial space between planet Earth and the moon, like having complete dominance between the moon and the Earth militarily. That's frightening. Military Space Forces, that's the title of the book, is a recipe for space-based warfare. It is simultaneously belligerent, nationalistic, provocative, well-researched, and extremely scary. And it forms the basis of much of the official U.S. policy regarding the militarization of space. Among other topics, Collins discusses the fact that the moon in particular is rich with many natural resources that could be mined and brought back to Earth for economic returns. He says that parties that hope to satisfy economic interests in space must maintain access to resources on the moon and beyond, despite opposition if necessary, and perhaps deny access to competitors who seek monopolies. He warns, however, that rival forces may lie in wait to hijack shipments on return from the moon. Obviously, if America invests huge capital in mining the moon, it must then defend its investments. Anti-satellite warfare is analyzed. Collins's thinking is dangerous, advocating a soft-kill weapons that penetrates target surfaces without impairing them, and that can selectively disorient, damage, or destroy human beings, as well as damage sensitive equipment within satellites or space stations. He also suggests jamming communication systems, spray painting satellite camera lenses, focusing blind lights onto laser reflectors, or surreptitious I actually can't say that word. Surreptitious introduction of foreign objects into booster fuel of enemy rockets, or the surreptitious introduction of foreign objects into booster fuel of enemy rockets. So that just means like throwing things like large objects that aren't weapons into the booster rockets of enemy rockets. And he discusses the merits of laser beam weapons and of particle beam weapons consistently of high energetic protons, neutrons, electrons, and hydrogen atoms. That sounds like nuclear weapons. And of particle beam weapons. Particle beam weapons. Isn't that nuclear weapons? Oh, man. So this is how they get over on us. People like me, like I'm an intelligent, educated person. I don't really quite understand their language. Okay, let's get back to this. He talks of the use of nuclear weapons in space and of the efficacy of various forms of nuclear radiation, which he says is unimpeded because there is no atmosphere in space and could therefore cover much more space volume than if used in the atmosphere near the Earth's surfaces. It would work especially well against targets in low space orbit. However, he concedes that nuclear radiation cannot distinguish friend from foe. Electromagnetic pulses from nuclear explosions would wound users as well as the intended victims. Collins explores war on the moon, saying that the strike forces there could use the full range of offensive maneuvers that are now used on Earth. Space mines could be easily positioned. He describes how space-based civilian vehicles could be used surreptitiously for military activities. Let me read that sentence again. He describes how space-based civilian vehicles could be used surreptitiously for military activities. He says that lasers, sensors, and telecommunication devices can be concealed within satellites that appear perfectly harmless. Wow. Weapons could piggyback on satellites that are ostensibly for reconnaissance and surveillance. He is particularly keen on biological and chemical warfare in space, saying that self-contained biospheres like a space station offer a superlative environment for these sorts of attacks because they rely on a closed-circuit life support system that continually recirculates air and water. Clandestine agents could dispense into space stations. What? I can't believe people even think like this. Clandestine agents could dispense into space stations lethal or incapacitating chemical or biological agents, which, because they are colorless and odorless, are impossible to spot before symptoms appear. He introduced the notion of fighting from space, targeting particular installations on Earth, and quoting former astronaut Michael Collins, who said that space is an ideal place from which to attack surface combatants and aircraft carriers, because ships stand out as clearly as billiard balls on a green felt when seen from space. Wow. Collins advocates the use of psychological operations, or PSYOPs. These techniques of psychological warfare could be used to control elitist and popular opinion as non-lethal weapon systems, or to convince rivals that it would be useless to start or continue military space operations. So it would be useless to start or continued. So that means that only the U.S. gets to use the space. Just the U.S., the United States military. We get to dominate everything. Collins said that these PSYOP maneuvers would deprive opponents of freedom of action while preserving it for oneself, and advocating using PSYOP propaganda to spread subversive ideas, including the futility of space for achievement of military superiority, the perils to world peace by militarizing space, and the waste of global resources better spent on people than a fruitless arms race. He says that U.S. superiority in space could culminate in a bloodless total victory if lagging powers could neither cope nor catch up technologically. This is not a pleasant scenario for 95% of the Earth's population who do not happen to be American, and who rightly feel that the moon and the heavens belong to them too. Wow. Well, we're 45 minutes in. I think I am going to end. We're at a new subtitle, and it is called U.S. Plans for War in Space. And we've already been told about that, haven't we? Yes, we have. I'm definitely going to be doing a podcast next week. And in fact, I think on Spreaker, I'm going to actually just continue to read this book. But this will post up on KEPW next week, next Tuesday night. And I will pick up on page 118. And we're going to keep going. I want to thank everybody who listens to this podcast and actually who cares enough to actually understand what's going on. These things are really, I think our military whole agenda, it's going on its own time frame, and we're on a need-to-know basis, and we really don't need to know. They're just not telling us. I mean, when we think about where we are with the NMD, let's see what they say. The national, oh my gosh, I want to see where we're at with the space treaties. Current space treaties. Let's see what they say about this. The five United Nations treaties on outer space are the Outer Space Treaty. There are 5 commonly referred to space law treaties and principles. So let's go see what this says. It's UNSA. I never heard of UNOSA. UNOOSA. United Nations Office for Outer Space Affairs. UNUSA. I wonder if that means anything in another language. It probably does, because these people are lunatics. They like these type of acronyms. The Committee on the Peaceful Uses of Outer Space is a forum for development of international space law. So the treaties, so right now the treaties commonly referred to as the 5 United Nations treaties on outer space are the Outer Space Treaty, the Treaty on Principles Governing the Activities of States in the Exploration and Use of Outer Space, including the Moon and other celestial bodies, the Rescue Agreement, the Agreement on the Rescue of Astronauts, the Return of Astronauts, and the Return of Objects launched into space, into outer space, the Liability Convention, the Convention on International Liability for Damage Caused by Space Objects, the Registration Convention, the Convention on Registration of Objects Launched into Outer Space, and the Moon Agreement, the Agreement governing the activities of states on the Moon and other celestial bodies. Let's find out how many states have ratified these treaties. So how many have the latest depository notifications? Let's see. Sorry, folks. I want to see what this is. Conventions on registration of objects. The United States has not agreed to any of this stuff. So that's kind of the weird part. The United States is actually not a member of any of that. So they can talk about what they want, but the United States have absolutely no plan of cooperating internationally with anyone. As we're seeing right now, they're kind of like the bullies of the world. That's just kind of what they are. Which is why I hope this last election was us deciding to get involved. Because that's what happens. If you leave the bullies to run the show, this is the kind of government we get. Kids thrown in cages, the Space Force moving on, a president who's profiting personally off of our government, and a Congress who has been too weak to stand up to him. Hopefully this next election, with what just happened, we're going to see a Congress where we are going to have investigations into President Trump breaking the emoluments clause from day one. That is an impeachable offense. And that should have been, I mean, literally people took the president to court to sue him because Congress refused to look into it. And the court said, this is Congress's job. We can't do it. So now that we have Congress, a real Congress who wants to uphold our Constitution, hopefully, we can get something going on this emoluments clause, because that's one of my big bones to pick. I don't know about the Russia involvement with him colluding with, I mean, we know he's a criminal with all of his other activities, but for sure he's been blatantly breaking the emoluments clause. So we have to rein in all these people. I also want to give a shout out to Ron Wyden's office. I cannot wait to go talk to Ron Wyden's office. The day after Jeff Sessions got fired, I was at a protest at the Wayne Morris building downtown. And turns out to be the last speaker. There was people in line and they said, okay, this is going to be the last speaker. I didn't have anything planned. I just went to a protest and they said, hey, you can get in line. I was like, okay, I'm going to get in line and say what I think. And I think I said something about we have to put pressure on our elected officials that they're all coerced. I believe that our officials are either corrupt or coerced. I don't believe that they are actively able to talk about things. Like they cannot tell you that we have nuclear contamination. Right here in Albany, nobody's going to tell you that the ATI building is contaminated with nuclear waste. It is actually one of the biggest Superfund sites in Oregon. And the nuclear radiation, when you track it, goes to the 5 freeway from where that building is. And Ron Wyden, Jeff Merkley, and Pete DeFazio are not going to make a big stink out of that because they don't want people to know about it. But it is a big thing. John Goffman unequivocally proved that when people are exposed to nonstop, low-level nuclear contamination, we get diabetes, we get autoimmune diseases, we get schizophrenia, and we get cancers and leukemias. And what do we have in Albany? A lot of that. So the writing's on the wall. They can deny all they want. So when I gave my little speech and I said that about them being coerced or colluded, or I said they're either corrupt or they're coerced. I think they get the choice in Washington, D.C. Do you want to be rich or you want to be dead? And I think they pick rich. I mean, what would you pick? If it's either they're going to kill your kids or you just get rich. I think that's an easy choice. This is why we're in the state we're in. Because we're basically being bullied by a bunch of rich people pushing all of our elected officials around. And I said, we have to stand up to them. We have to put pressure on them for them to do the right thing because they are worried about losing their jobs. So it is up to us to call their offices and pay attention to the details of what's going on in government. That's why I do this radio show, so that we can pay attention. I was shocked when I found out that after Fukushima, that our government isn't really handling the nuclear issues honestly and correctly. It blows me away. So Ron Wyden's office, June from his office, stopped me at the bottom of the stairwell and said, well, what isn't Ron Wyden doing? And I'm like, well, I have been trying to call his office. Not trying. I have called his office on 3 separate occasions and attempted to get a meeting with Ron Wyden's lackeys so that I can give them some documentation that shows them about the proximity factor of the Columbia Generating Station. Because the Columbia Generating Station, as I've said as often as I can, is only 12.1 miles, I believe, away from Hanford. If Columbia Generating Station has a nuclear meltdown caused by an earthquake, which we are anticipating, nobody can get into Hanford for at least 2 weeks. And we have tanks in Hanford that need to be churned. We have activities that have to happen on the Hanford nuclear dump site. If you can't get in there, we are going to have catastrophic explosions going on at some of those tanks, period. And those fires will blow up for 100,000 years. That's what I call the proximity factor. That's what makes the Columbia Generating Station Besides being a $500 million loss to the states of Washington and Oregon, it runs at a loss of $500 million a year to employ 1,500 people at the Columbia Generating Station. It loses $500 million a year. Everybody in Eugene, Oregon pays more electricity because we are forced to buy nuclear power from a nuclear power station that loses $500 million a year. It's not generating money, folks. It's costing us money. And it is not only costing us money, but it is actually a grave danger to the entire planet. So I hope as this show winds up and winds down this evening, that my words will spur you to also call Ron Wyden, Jeff Merkley, Pete DeFazio, Patty Murray, Maria Cantwell, the people involved who can make decisions to pressure the Columbia Generating Station Consortium to shut down. They intentionally made it complicated to shut it down. It feeds about 50 other, I think it's like 50 other or 30 other areas. It's not just one simple area, like the Bonneville Power Station. I think there's like 38 or 52 other power stations that it gives a tiny, tiny bit to. And they made it like a big complicated web so that if we had to close it down, it is a big concocted mess. It's so messed up you can't hardly get it shut down. Intentionally designed so. But guess what? Everything can be undone. As we're watching them collapse our planet, everything can be undone. The Pacific Ocean is dying because of nuclear contamination, and the climate change activists refuse to say anything about it. We can close the Columbia Generating Station, and I hope you guys will join me in calling our elected officials and saying, wait a minute, what about that proximity factor? What about the fact that the Columbia Generating Station is less than 15 miles away from Hanford, and if we have a nuclear meltdown, we're going to have a big fire. I'm going to leave you guys with that. Next week I'll come back. I'm going to finish up reading Dr. Caldicott's book. Not finishing. I probably read 10 pages, 9 pages a night. Thank you for joining us. You have been listening to Lonnie Clark, your host with the Age of Fission radio show. Listen to us at 7:30 in the morning on Saturday at KEPW 97.3 FMLP. And with my co-host Heidi Lambert, I'm hoping to get Dave Parrish in from Operation Save the Earth in this week or next. Thank you for joining us. Very much appreciate you joining us. Many prayers, much love, many blessings. Remember, happiness is resistance and love is greater than fear. Put your courage feet on, you guys. Thank you so much for joining us. We'll talk to you soon. The Age of Fission radio show brings you book readings, pertinent articles, interviews with both activists and victims of nuclear and environmental contamination. We strive to deliver only the facts from reliable sources. We want to remind you that love is greater than fear, and happiness is resistance. Our dedication to love and happiness paves the road for innovation and healing. As we face our harsh reality, let us hold each other up and rejoice in our humanity. If you want to comment, please send your thoughts to ageoffission@gmail.com. That's AGEOFFISSION @gmail.com to your host, Lonnie Clark.